Good morning, Brandon.
Good morning, Keith.
It's weird not hearing our own voices, isn't it?
It is. It is.
And we made a little bit of a change to the podcast setup in my time of transition.
Because you got your eviction notice, basically.
I don't like that. Yes.
It's a soft
I got
eviction.
my moving papers. And for just a period of time, I'll be sitting kind of across from my son-in-law, which will be weird, but it's exciting. It's exciting. And what else is exciting is we are going to continue to do the podcast.
That's right.
Ad infinitum. I mean,
even though Keith is ditching us here at Stonebridge, we
Right.
still love him.
Yes.
We're still friends.
Absolutely. And we'll be laboring together in a different way.
That's right.
Right. And hopefully, one of the things that hopefully as my experience grows there, then like the robustness of the conversations about preaching and leading and all that stuff, and how we can sort of boil those things down for people to help their own Bible studies. Hopefully that will get richer and richer.
Yeah.
And that brings up sort of the topic for today. And so going off of here at Stonebridge, we're preaching through 1 Samuel, which is Old Testament narrative. The passages for the sermons tend to be a little bit longer because if you didn't, you really have a span of, you've got a main idea within a span of multiple chapters.
Sometimes,
cases,
yes,
right?
definitely. Mm-hmm.
And as we're doing that here, I am, back and forth from here and Risen Hope and Anamosa, and I'm preaching from Mark, right? So, for example, some of them are a little bit longer narratives, right? But this week was just Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 33, which is who are people saying I am? And who do you say who I am? And it's a very short passage, right? And so as I was thinking, I was terrified because I was like, I'm not going to have enough content.
I love that this is still a thought process that after almost 20 years of preaching, you're still worried about not having enough content. You're the only person that's worried about you not having enough content. It's so
I know.
great.
It is comical. You might, if you have ever, been in a church that I've served at and heard my sermons, you right now have to be thinking, how does he not know he has a lot of content? And it's
good.
It is, but it's also, we don't want to just approach this from the preaching perspective. Like I've got some applications later on for Bible study that we can relate that to. But I wanted to kind of dig in, does the length of the text being preached change the way that you approach your preparation?
That's great.
Right.
Absolutely. It changes the way you approach preparation and what you do in the pulpit with the sermon itself. And one of the things I love about exposition, so exposition being the kind of preaching where the main point and aim of the sermon is driven by the main point and aim of the text open in front of you, is that you can do exposition with any size chunk of text.
Right, sure.
The challenge, of course, is the larger chunk you take, the more general you have to be. So, and that, that's true in all sorts of aspects of life. But so for and it gets really hard to figure that out in narratives that where chunks can take a long time to tell the story. Right. So, like, I wrestled when this last Sunday, Pastor Steve preached 1 Samuel 9, 1 to 10, 16. It's a lot. And I wrestled with where to break that. Sure. Can you break it into other, smaller chunks? And you probably could, but where I kind of you have the donkeys getting lost in 9-1 or 9-3, right? The story begins, and then it concludes with Saul coming home, and the donkeys have been found in 10:16. So that's one long narrative, right? And there's several twists and turns in there. to complicate it further, one could argue that chapters 8 through 12, or even chapters 9 through 11, are one narrative, because where Saul is first privately anointed, he goes on this journey and loses the donkeys and gets found in the middle of God's plan. Then he's publicly anointed, but that's challenged by some. Then it's confirmed in the victory against the Ammonites in chapter 11, and then he's re-anointed at the end of chapter 11. So chapters 9 to 11 are one story.
Right.
Well, that's too much, and so we could have preached chapters 4 to 6 in one sermon, because that's one kind of cycle, but we broke it into 3. So there's all sorts of factors you have to weigh, but and I mean, some of them are how much content can your audience endure? Sure. How many weeks do you have to work with?
Right.
Non-theological but very practical issues.
Right.
And so, but to your actual question, like, how does it affect it? You still have to do the same amount of study.
Yeah.
But you have to leave so much of what you've discerned out. That's probably the hardest part for a preacher. Is I've seen all of these things, all of my little treasures that I've gleaned, and you can maybe bring a quarter of them to bear in the sermon itself, if you're going to be clear and not just a running commentary of all the cool things I saw. But if you're going to give the thrust of the text, because this story is making a point. If I'm going to make that point, I'm not going to be able to pull out every detail. And so that's where I think preachers can struggle, is like, what do I leave in? What do I take out? And
well, let me throw you some. So I put a few bullet points for both long passages and short passages. So I'm going to throw these out to you, and you tell me 2 things. One, how do you avoid this pitfall? And maybe second, how have you yourself found a challenge with these things? So for longer passages, since we just talked about a longer passage. One is like information overload.
Yeah.
Right? And like, you can't cover everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I would try.
And that, I mean, almost every preacher I know is going to try, right? And to be honest, Steve did a great job of demonstrating a very long story. And because here's my temptation. Here's what I typically do. Like when we did chapter 8, that's not that long of a story.
No, right.
But it's kind of long for a scripture reading. And so, one of the things you can do sometimes is I can rely on the scripture reading. I don't have to cover every detail,
right,
or even reread every verse in the sermon, because we heard it together in the scripture reading before the sermon.
Sure.
Well, when you get a long text like this, you can't do the whole thing. It's 12 minutes, I think, to read through the passage, or maybe 10 minutes. That's a lot of real estate. And so my temptation, when I can't read the full text, I try and include the other parts in the sermon where I'm at least reading them as part of the sermon. You can't even do that with last week's text.
Right.
And so figuring out how to tell the story, and by the way, one of the reasons we publish the preaching schedule in advance, especially with narratives like this, is so that people can read it on their own ahead of time, because we're just not going to be able to read the whole thing some weeks. But thinking through, like, what is the movement of the story? Breaking it down into the sequence of events, which you can get overly minute there, but like. Sure. There's a lot of grouping that has to be done when you're figuring out the structure of a passage. And so what are the main sequence of events, and what are they doing? Where are they moving? Where are they taking the reader? And trying to follow that line, because, there's some really fascinating details about these prophets with Saul. He's going to meet these 3 prophets. And, you could spend a lot of time nerding out over that.
Yeah.
But the point is that that's one of 3 signs that are going to confirm his personal call.
Right.
And so you can hit that real quick and move on. and so I'm not even sure I'm answering like the pit. How do you avoid the pitfall? It's hard. It's hard. Discipline and revision probably, because your first draft is probably going to be way too much information.
Right.
And so like going through and figuring out what actually, and here's the key thing. Like if you've got a clear grasp on the main point of the story,
Right.
What I'm going to emphasize and spend some time on in telling the story are the things that are going to drive the main point home.
Right.
There's lots of rabbit trails, and they're not unimportant, but you can't do everything in a 35-minute sermon. And so letting the main point drive my treatment of the material and the level of depth I'm spending on different features, I think.
Yeah. What kind of things, though, will make you kind of lose the plot? Because that was the second thing is like, it's not just too much information, but like how can you reliably prioritize the main things, right? Because sometimes they're obvious.
Yeah.
But sometimes there might be like parallel. It seems like parallel in importance, right? Like, because there's some Old Testament narrative passages that you could preach them one of two or three different ways with an emphasis that would not be doing damage to the text, right?
No, yeah, exactly.
So how then, like, do you prioritize those things based on what your overall arc for the series is, or like how do you good. Like when you're reading, how do you prioritize? This is what I'm going to emphasize. Without losing the plot, this is how I'm going to look at this.
That's so good. So I think the two things I try to think about are what's the unique contribution of this passage in the story.
Okay.
But also like uniqueness is not necessarily equal to emphasis,
and that's sexy for preachers.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is.
And so like if the emphasis could be something that's very common.
Yeah.
And so how I preach that emphasis, I'm going to draw out the unique contribution, but uniqueness and emphasis are not identical.
Right.
And then the other piece would be like what is the structure emphasizing? Like, and so I've wrestled with that with the sermon coming up this Sunday. So it's not particularly long. It's 10:17 to 27.
Right.
But there are three different ways that you could lock into a main point.
Right.
You could use you could follow the plot arc of it, in which case, and so this is the story where Saul is, it's the public identification of Saul as the king, and they draw lots, and he's hiding among the baggage, and then he's drug out and presented, and so on. Plot arc is kind of like this, who's the king gonna be, and even though Israel's been rebellious, God is the rising action is the drawing of the lots, and then they get to what you think is the climax, and you can't find him.
Right.
And then they finally find him, and the climax is this pronouncement of, here's your guy.
Right.
Look at him. There's no one in Israel like him, right? And then it kind of resolves from the commitments they make and being sent home. So that's plot arc.
Yeah.
Or you can go characters. What's Israel doing in this story? They're so clueless and helpless. They're rebellious in rejecting God. They're clueless in thinking that God's going to be okay with it. And they're helpless. They can't even find the king. Like the king they asked for, they have to go ask God's help to find him. Like it's just kind of versus Saul, whose kind of characterization is a little bit, at this stage, it's like, we were warned about him in chapter 8. He doesn't seem that bad in chapter 9. And now he's like hiding and afraid. So they want a king who's going to lead him into battle. Right. But the dude's hiding.
Yeah.
And so we're not sure what to make of Saul. And then there's, the Lord's characteristic. And so, but then the third way you could get at that. And so that, the first one would emphasize the presentation of the king. The second one would kind of contrast the characters in there. The third one would be what's surprising in the story? Where's the big surprise of this story? So I think there's several of them. There's a surprise initially that God actually gives them what they ask for. Like when he lines them up for the casting of lots. Like if you're not thinking Joshua 7, that's the last time this happened, and they drew lots to find the guilty party. But here they're drawing lots to find the king.
Right.
And then there's the surprise of the king himself. Is this, can this man save Israel? But the real surprise, I think, is the fact that God is not just tolerating Saul. He's not like, okay, here's a temporary object lesson, and then he adopts the king that they wanted to replace him with. He adopts him as his anointed king.
Yeah.
This is my chosen king.
Right.
This is the guy I've chosen to save my people. God folds Israel's rebellion into his plan for the kingship. That's a big surprise. So you can land on, all of them are going to be in the same ballpark, but they might be on a different base.
Sure.
And so this is my mental anxiety this week preparing for the sermon. So to your point, how do you dial it in? So I think one of the things that is helpful about the unique question, what's the unique contribution? Because so you could make the same main point from this passage as you made in chapter 8. Be careful what you ask for when you're asking not for God, right? The Lord,
you've got the already did that.
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. And so, so I don't think that's a foul, but how can I get more precise? And so for right now, I'm leaning on not so much on the stupidity of Israel, but the surprise of God actually folding their rebellion into his plan.
Yeah.
And because Saul's the anointed. David will not lay a hand on he's not an imposter. As much as he feels like this isn't the guy we wanted or that he's not qualified, he is the anointed though.
Right.
Which then frees you up when you realize that. I think you're doing chapter 11, right?
Yes, right.
How can I make typological connections between Saul in chapter 11 and Christ?
Right.
Because I kind of feel like I'm supposed to here. He's
sure.
actually saving the people. Well, because that link is based on the office he holds, not the character of the person, I think that's a legitimate link.
Right.
He is the anointing. So anyhow, this is more of like a therapy session right now in my sermon prep.
Well, but I think it's important. And, here's an excursus too, which is, and, if you're listening to this, you're like, well, I'm not a preacher. So what is this for me? What it is for you is to understand, there's a lot of things, if I'm on Facebook, because I'm in Christian circles, I'll see these things all the time with these guys that are like, here's the art of preaching. Or like, if you're going to get somebody's attention, you got to do this and this and this. And I'm like, hey, you know what's better than having some sort of hooky thing or some sort of grabby chain or something really, really interesting is to take the time to look at the book as a whole.
Yes.
And do the preparation in the beginning to say I'm going to make sure that I'm not just getting lazy and going back to the same theme when I know that there's going to be passages here. And if you do the work, right, and you look at the overall tone of the book and the overall purpose of the book, and then you sort of section that out and start thinking, how am I going to make sure that I can cover all these facets, right? It's like shining a light on a diamond,
exactly.
right?
And which passages are gonna, because you can find those themes in many texts,
right? Yeah, really.
But which text is gonna shine it most brilliantly?
That's right.
There's, when you get to chapter 10 or 12, excuse me, there's things I've been wanting to say,
right?
And I've hinted, right?
Yeah.
Just because it works out doesn't mean God approves of it.
Right.
Right. And so I hinted at that at chapter 8. I'm going to hint at that here. Chapter 12, he just takes the gloves off. That is don't think that just because this has gone okay with Saul that you aren't in massive sin for asking for him.
Right.
And he rebukes them and reminds them of their colossal rebellion and so I have to hold that for chapter 12. And so absolutely. But to your point, spending the time in the whole story, awareness of the whole story, where it's going, those big themes, the melodic line, that's another tool that's going to help me dial in my text of what do I need to focus on and draw? I can't say everything about this passage.
Right.
What are the main things I need to say?
Right. Is there what level of challenge is there? Even talking about then If you're doing narrative, you might get so caught up in the them then that you sort of just like shoehorn in the gospel at the end of it.
Totally,
Right?
totally.
And
yeah.
even if your points might be different in terms of the overall narrative, everyone is Jesus is the king. It's like, yeah, we get it. That's the obvious. Jesus is the king. You could literally end
every sermon
passage
that
as
way.
like
Yeah.
Jesus is the king. Or like Jesus is the warrior in battle.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
But how do you? I mean, that's another thing. Like another level of digging is to not just appropriately make a general point, but to make applications, gospel applications that flow from that particular point.
Yes. And the clearer I am on the main point, that's gonna give. So it's like you could find lots of roads to Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Which roads to Christ are driven by the main point of the text? How does Christ answer the main point, or expand or elevate the main point?
Right.
And then how does that drive my application?
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of questions I try to ask when I'm doing it. Because coming up, you could make 3 or 4 different roads to get to Jesus here.
Right.
So if the main point is something along the lines of our rebellion cannot keep God from accomplishing redemption through his anointed king. That's my working main point right now.
I like that.
We'll see if
good.
sticks for Sunday or not. Okay, so rebellion, our rebellion against God isn't going to stop him from accomplishing redemption through his anointed king. Okay, now my mind's going to John 11, where they're going to try and stop God's king. They're rebelling against them. It's better that one man should die for the nation than everybody perish.
Yeah, right.
And they don't realize they're actually prophesying the very coronation of the king. Like they think they're rebelling. They are rebelling.
They are, yeah.
They are very much rebelling. And yet God's folding that into accomplishing salvation through his anointed.
Yeah.
So that's like...
Which is great, because then what you're doing is like what a lot of people will do is they'll take a narrative and then they'll go to like an epistle, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, let's see what Paul says about this. What you're doing is taking a narrative in the Old Testament, linking it with a narrative in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And again, like you don't always have to, especially when you're young and preaching, you think everything has to be some sort of epistle. Like it has to be a direct.
And it's not a complete foul.
It's not bad, but
it's not as precise as it could be sometimes.
That's right. That's right. And there's nothing wrong. I mean, because it is blatant Christological application in the Gospels, you can very easily take a narrative as a point from a narrative in the Old Testament.
Yeah, like how does especially with the way that Jesus recapitulates ancient Israel's story. Like there's just so much of this was meant to point to that.
Yeah.
And so
that's cool. That's cool.
It'll be fun.
It will be fun. I want to ask some things about shorter passages.
Yeah.
So I'm
out
of yours in the
mind.
mind.
Shorter passage.
Yeah. So with Mark, some are just obvious, applications and stuff like that. But I don't know that the applications are as much the problem as like. I think challenges for shorter passages would be like contextual omission, right? So instead of you got the opposite problem of a long narrative.
Yeah.
You're trying to chop up a longer narrative into a real short bit, right?
Yes.
And you can hyper focus on that to the to violence over the overall.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You're kind of like preaching a really great sermon about this text, but you have no sense of how it actually fits into the story being told when you walk out of the...
Yeah, you got a one-off, and people are like, that was a nice sermon. But does your application, your main point, does that flow from into what's coming next from what had come before? If it's just this... But that's how we look at the Gospels sometimes. These disjointed, Jesus shows up, and we're like, what is this?
That is a unique challenge of the Gospels in particular, because unlike your Old Testament narratives, and even unlike Acts, a lot of the Gospels are not particularly chronologically oriented. Yeah. So and you could demonstrate that by just looking at the order, within the synoptics, different events. So there's something else sometimes driving the arrangement, thematic issues or things like that. And so it is telling a story but that story is as much, there's large chunk movements. You've got the early birth narratives in a couple of them. You've got the inauguration of his ministry.
Yeah.
Then you have the public teaching and then you have Passion. And once you get Passion Week, then we have more of a building story over chapters.
Right.
But then, like in John, you get 6 chapters of discourse. It's one long sermon, the upper room discourse. So that, I think, is a particularly unique challenge of the Gospels. Is it is hard to build week to week in that middle section of his life and miracles and teachings. Now, so then what, following the flow, what is this author doing with it? And so Mark has his way of...
Yeah, Mark's got his own stuff.
And being as in tuned into how is this fitting into... Like, last week or 2 weeks ago, you had the... or maybe you did this in this week, the touching of the blind man. He has to touch him twice.
That was the week before, right? Yep.
Which... And how does that feed into exactly? It feeds into your
you
passage.
See it like you see me, but it's like a tree walking.
Yeah, exactly.
So I got to hit you again.
Yes.
Before you're actually going to get it.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
But you might not. And that's the mistake that you could make there is just focusing on that interaction with Peter, but leaving out the healing before that, because it seems, and even if you're doing Bible study, if you're new to this and you don't have a good commentary, you're probably not immediately seeing that.
No, probably not. That takes some instincts to be developed.
You have to be familiar with it and stuff. So it's like, if you're listening and you're like, man, I never caught that in Bible study, don't feel bad about it. But that's why it's so important for us to not just be like, let me get this one point from this place.
Yeah.
And you need to think, what happened before this?
Yes.
That we know it's not disjointed. Like if there's a healing here, that means something, because he didn't heal everybody. And so when he was healing,
he didn't touch them. Like, why did it take twice? That's the weird thing of that. Like, what is he didn't say
why
the
does
right
why does he spit on everybody?
Yeah. So that one stands out as so weird that he touched him, and so he sees, but he doesn't quite see.
Yeah.
Well, and then you get Peter with 2 affirmations, and the first one is, I'm going to give you a second try. Right. He sees what he doesn't see, and so it sets up that But again, that's paying attention to narrative and gospel, even though it might not. And of course, I do think that those things are somewhat chronological, but it may be 2 different stories. But Mark has now stuck them together
on
to
purpose,
illustrate like the healing is not only a healing; it's a parable of the spiritual sight. You have physical blindness followed by a spiritual blindness in Peter, and Mark's doing that intentionally. And so literary context.
Yeah, and same thing with the double feeding of the 4,000 and 5,000. Right, like it's is this the same story? That's why all these critics are like, no, it's the same story. They just got some details different. I'm like, no.
He specifically says
clearly there are differences here, and he's making an emphasis. It's different crowd, different place. Like but just to say that it's really easy to try to go for the low hanging fruit in a passage like that in Mark, where it's like this massive, like, who do you say that I am? And forget that a big part of what's going on is Peter doesn't understand. He does, but he doesn't. Yeah. And it's going to take extra healing.
Yeah.
He's going to have constantly this refining of really understanding, which becomes a really great gospel application piece. Like, you may think you know this. I'll ask you to take another. My thing was like, take a second look at Jesus.
Yes.
If you're not understanding rightly, take a second look. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you're just like, oh, okay, I'm missing something.
And so doing that short passage in Mark 27 to 30. Just to reiterate what you were saying, to do that well, you can do it well, and there's enough in there for a whole sermon.
Right.
But you've got to set it in the context of the story before and after.
Right. Yeah.
So that's this special, like with the large chunks you've got to dial into the emphasis because you can't do everything you want to do. With the small chunks, you got to remember this is part of a bigger story. And what are those links that feed in and actually open up the passage? Because context is king, right?
Sure.
It's what clarifies the intended meaning, and so
keeps us from proof texting too,
absolutely.
right? It's just like, I've got this axe to grind. I'll take this passage and I'm gonna ignore. I mean, like passages in any of the epistles that Paul's writing. Good grief, like they're all tied together by a theme.
Yeah,
really. But, But you can just grab whatever you want, make it say whatever you want for your own cause.
And to that point, there are similar challenges in some of the epistles, like. How do I take a large chunk or a small chunk?
Yeah.
The book of Hebrews is probably the hardest one because there's so much in there that if you don't take small chunks, there's just a richness that you're not able to spend time. And yet, he takes a whole chapter to make his point.
Yeah.
He is laying track and building an argument, and then and so you risk missing. There's sweetness in the acorn, but you miss the forest for the tree, and so that I think is you can run into this challenge in other parts of the Bible as well, and so
How would you say, let's bring this to people who are just like, I just really want to study the Bible better. Like, how do we take some of these things and encourage, like, if you've got a short period of time for Bible study, okay, like you're doing Bible study every day, maybe you get up in the morning, you do half an hour Bible study, okay, how can you leverage these types of principles to maximize your time with Scripture?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there are so many different ways. If you have the luxury of, I'm not trying to get through a particular book in a particular amount of time,
go slow.
Well, you could do both. Give it a relatively quick read.
Right.
Get the big picture, and then come back and work through it a second time.
Are you talking about reading through the whole book first and then go back?
Yeah. So maybe, Gospel of Mark, maybe I cover the whole book in 1 week, and then I come back and I spend a whole week on each little section.
Let's make that popular.
That could be fun.
Yeah, that would be fun.
So it's really a both and figuring out, the hurriedness of life is, I think, what often gets in the way, or feeling like I've got to come up with some deliverable at the end of my quiet time, rather than just spending time with the Lord in His Word and in prayer. Like, I mean, it's good to we need practical application, and we need to reflect honestly on what God is convicting us of or clarifying to us, or what does obedience look like. But I think one of the biggest enemies of meaningful time with the Lord and His Word is that there's got to be some deliverable at the end of this 30 minutes, or I've wasted it. And so you're just looking for the deliverable.
Right.
You're not just enjoying Jesus.
Right.
And letting Him regrind your lenses and how you see the world and your life and your family and how you see Him. So the Bible study is as much spending time with a person as it is in the words of that person. The reason we spend time in the words of that person is to spend time with that person. And so, but He's made Himself known through these words. And so digging deep, getting the big picture, I think those are both helpful things in Bible study.
Yeah, and if you're aiming, I want to say this right, I think. You tell me if this is not right. If your main point is aiming for application, because most people are like, I need something to apply. If your main thing is aiming for application without the context, you're most likely on many instances to miss the actual application, but you are way less danger of missing the application if you're focusing on the context, getting the context.
I think that's
right.
true. I mean, I think you can fall into the ditch on either side.
Sure,
you can get so into the analysis that you never actually do anything with it. Your knowledge just
paralysis.
Yeah. Your knowledge just puffs up, right?
Yeah.
But the other side is, if I'm just jumping to something practical, anything practical here, you accidentally end up sliding, I think, a bit into legalism and moralism,
sure.
because now I've done the practical thing. What's God going to do for me? Or I've done the practical thing, but I'm doing it out of my own strength and ability, and I'm not letting it flow from dependence on the Spirit, or from, whatever God commands, He provides. Like and so am I only focusing on those commands? Am I depending on the provision for carrying those out, right, which is often more important in the text than you can't. You need both. Both are there.
Sure.
So you can fall into either ditch, but I think that for whatever reason, that's become a really driving factor in personal Bible study, is like, got to find that nugget.
And in preaching.
And preaching too, yeah. And I'm not opposed, I just want it to come from the text itself. I want it to be the right point and application.
Yeah, and I think we end up where we always end up with this is, the podcast is called In Context. So, like, we want to make sure that the biggest point is make sure you get your context
right.
Right?
Absolutely.
Whether you're preaching, whether you're doing personal Bible study, always focus on the main message and take your application from that by the Holy Spirit. All right. Thanks, brother.
Thanks.
See you next time.